everybody here? Excited to see you. I think everybody was here for Sunday, right? Anybody here today that wasn't here Sunday? But did you go back and listen? He said yes, absolutely. All right. You're fine. You're forgiven. Okay. So touch and go, I'll tell y'all real quick. Yeah, people who speak up here, probably anywhere, they might somewhat look like they have it together as they get started, but leading up to it, it's not always like that, especially for my family, especially when you have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 39-year-old tomorrow. So yesterday I just wanted to tell this in case you see my eyes start watering, but yesterday afternoon we always go on this golf cart ride. There's this dirt road next to us, and we stopped to let the kids out and walk, and we started hearing meows, and then found 3 kittens in the bushes that were abandoned. This happens to be a road where people drop animals off. It's really sad, so if that's you, stop doing that, please, if you're listening. But we heard these kittens, and so I go diving into the brush and get all scratched up, and I poked my eye really bad. And so if you've ever scratched your eye, it waters, it burns. And so if you see me up here tearing up or crying, I'm okay. But that's what I say with touch and go. It was that, and then 7 went feeling good, and Micah's off the chain, and Blake is there by himself. So we made it though. Okay. So just a little preface for the day. If you made it here, good for you too. I'm sure it's not always easy to end your day. Everybody's working, full days of work, and then make it here and dedicate your time. But I commend you if you are here in person. And then for those of you who are watching or will watch later, there's a reason you are watching, so stay tuned. Today's message is probably my favorite of the topics. So we'll recap a little bit here. On Sunday, we kicked off the series, our Leadership Equipping series, and I guess you could think of this as like your foundation to how you should view leadership in general, how you should view your position in leadership in several different areas. So these are the 4 areas that we are discussing. We've already covered your personal leadership area. The outcome of developing your personal leadership is your perspective, right? So you're developing your perspective. We all have certain perspectives, but the greater you grow in your perspective or change in certain perspectives, the greater the outcome of your personal leadership. So how do we lead ourselves first? Why is that important? And then today we're moving on to one-on-one leadership, developing trust, then family or team leadership. That's the development of our families, our teams, and the legacies. And then we'll finish up on Sunday with organizational leadership, which is really around effectiveness within the full organization. So the key concepts, so that we remember and we if you want to write them down again or if you missed it. So Jesus is the best example of leadership that we have. So we might as well pull from that to guide in this discussion. I am kind of going through some of the direction within this book. It's called Lead Like Jesus. This was one that I'd read before a while ago. And then as we were compiling the message, I had so many books, so many references to pull from, but this one just stood out, and it's so simply put. So I wanted to tie that into some of the content that I have. Okay, so leading like Jesus. Leadership is influence. So whether you are a leader of yourself or of one other person or of your family or within an organization, it's focusing on your leadership and how it flows. So we're equipping ourselves. As a reminder, that is preparing ourselves for a task, preparing ourselves to increase our knowledge and awareness of our leadership and in those situations that we can apply it. We talked about the different ways in which we influence or can influence. There are the ethical ways and there are the non-ethical ways. We're going to go with the ethical ways. And as a reminder of that, that's to point out that you can have the ultimate end result that you're looking for to influence someone, but the long-term outcome is different. The long-term sticking of that influence is different, whether it's ethical or non-ethical. So the ethical, it means that there's no arm twisting, there's no pressuring, there's no trickery. When we lead like Jesus, it's all naturally in place already. It's how we were designed, and he is giving us and has given us examples through all of his ministry. We're building on our childlike faith, starting with that. If you were here or listened to the stories, you can go back. I'm not going to repeat that my mom didn't think I was the smartest kid of the two of us, but you can go back and read on that. But I believed in the Lord at an early age, building on childlike faith, giving me God-like confidence. So I wasn't really in my way. I wasn't too smart, and I wasn't in my way. So go back to that. Remember when you had that first immediate childlike faith, and pull from it to grow in that confidence. Your personal leadership is about perspective, changing your perspective. The best thing to do when you're thinking about, well, what is my perspective? It's probably pulling from your experiences in your life. And the goal is to evaluate, do I have areas of changing that I should maybe change my perspective? And the current learning and looking for new experiences. Okay, we talked about whose, so these are the two important concepts. Whose am I? So as we're doing that self-evaluating, we're saying, whose am I? So who is your ultimate authority? Who are you trying to please in this world? And then who am I? So that's more of your life purpose, like pull from qualities or values is another way to kind of define that. Then one of my favorites is the two worlds of, we'll pull that back up in a second, but the two worlds of influence. Did anybody here today, you can raise your hand if you thought about your two worlds of influence over the past few days. Oh, everybody raised their hand. That was everybody. Full participation. Okay. No, but awesome. I'm glad y'all thought about that. I thought about it a lot. You had homework that was kind of related to it. The homework was, further define whose am I and who I am. And then the two worlds of influence was greater defining. I guess we can pull that up. Let's go ahead and pull that slide up since we're going through the reminder of it. Okay. I'll probably touch on this slide every meeting that we talk about influence or leadership because this is so important. So this is the reminder that that's your sphere of influence, your areas that you impact, that you control, and then there's the outside, those things that you do not control, things that you really don't have influence on. So the goal here is that you start to use this as that tool in your tool belt to redirect your mind, and when you're in situations where you're being pulled into conversations, pulled into moods that affect you when it's covering things that you don't control. Why do we do that? Well, because there are many things that we can control and influence, and if we put that time and energy into those things, we'll start to see them grow, and we'll start to see change in it, ultimately with your perspective on your life. So I did that, and so I'll share with you guys since I'm speaking today. So I was like, well, what did I used to do, or where can I, how can I get better at this, bringing back what I influence and don't? So somehow I got subscribed to these emails, like all these news channels, like Yahoo and AOL, or I don't know what. I just get all these emails that have all these news updates, and they pretty much say the same thing. But as I'm going through just cleaning out, I'll get stuck on one, and then I'll open it up, and then it's like, so I found that I kept getting into these like headlines, and they draw you in because that's what they're for. But you know, anything about, recently it was all about Prince Harry and his wife and what they're going through, and I was like spending 15 minutes on it, and I was like, what am I doing? And then I'm thinking about so many other things that don't affect me, and it's starting to increase my anxiety about what are they going through in their life in that family. And so I was like, unsubscribe, and then I took another 15 minutes to unsubscribe from all the coupons that I get, and unsubscribe and unsubscribe. So that's just one strategy. It's kind of practical, but I think it's amazing. And I muted, okay, so at work we have a way in which everyone can communicate internally. We're all remote, but they have different channels. And over the past few months, there's just been one channel that has just, not supposed to be this way, but it's just been a real big downer, nothing but people complaining. And I found that I'd gone to it for other things, and so I just muted it. So like, mute it, and I don't ever see it, unless I had to specifically go to try to find that channel in order to read everything that's said on it. So those are two things that I've done to get back in control of what I focus on, where I can influence myself in the day. This isn't just a positivity circle. This is really, you're thinking about if I'm working on my own personal influence, what can I do different? So just two examples there. I didn't really talk to anyone or didn't answer anyone's phone call this week that I know would have pulled me in a different direction. It'll probably happen, but I'm remembering that I don't have to answer that call. I'm not obligated to that, because other things might be more important. All right, and then the other homework was your 5 fingers. You're supposed to think about who has impacted you most in your life and had influence on your life, why, and to add them each, or give them a finger and name them. You're supposed to thank them or call them or reach out to someone that you wanted to. Did anybody do that? I won't make you say up here how that went, but did anybody do it? Did you write it down at least? Yes? Raise your hand if you wrote it down. I know y'all can't see online, but everybody raised their hand on that too. It was great. Okay, so moving into today's focus, when we're talking through the different, and the 4 areas of leadership development, mentioned the personal one, influencing ourselves first. So all 4 of these, though, can be broken out into, and I should have probably discussed this on Sunday, but think about it as life roles and then organizational roles. So life roles typically mean outside of work, outside of, really any organization. So more of family, friends type of thing. The reason that that's important is to understand the difference is to think about the permanence of those roles. So can't really control who your family is, so that's permanent. And then your organizational roles that you hold for leadership, there's one-on-one there, there's team there. Those can be for moments. They can be for periods of time. They're not necessarily permanent. Now, the church kind of fits in a little bit, I feel like, of somewhat of the middle there, especially if you've been around each other for a long time. You call each other family or somewhat like family, so we might need to go through that in a different lesson. But for today, just think about it like that. If you're going through, okay, well, how does this apply to me? Typically, it's more in the life role, but we'll have time, probably other messages that dig deeper into the organizational role. Okay. The important thing, too, about these areas of development is that they do go in order. So the first one has to be, or should be, increased, heightened. You should grow in the first area before you can move on to the other, or have more of an effect on the other. So the first one being personal development. That's why we talk about it first, because we should influence that first before we can move on to the second, which is one-on-one leadership. And the outcome of this area is trust. It's all around trust. So, sounds simple, But I'm sure when I say that word, just as if when I read it and I was typing it out and thinking through it, there's a lot that probably of emotion and thoughts that come to it, to that word. But trust in the one-on-one is the most effective way to influence it. I mean, it's the only way. It's not one-on-one leadership. You're not more effective in your leadership because of your position or how great you are at the position, or because you are the father or the mother or the sister or the brother. It's your effectiveness is because of the trust that you develop. I love this. I read this through here, so I just kind of wrote it out. But he was talking about how Jesus' example of this is when he first went into the wilderness, where he battled his own trials and tribulations and refined his life purpose. This was his place of deciding whose he what is. We get a lot of verbs, pronouns, confusion there. Okay. And then who he was going to be. So ultimately, who was he going to follow? Who was his ultimate authority? And then who is going to be? So he went through his own self-evaluating. And then he went and gathered his disciples one-on-one. So self-evaluating, he was set, no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and then he went and gathered his disciples. So trust is the constant flow. It's not a one-time thing. It's not I did something great, or we had a good moment, and now we have trust with each other. It is a constant flow of vulnerability, caring, grace, commitment. That first one, I think, is probably one of the most impactful, which is your vulnerability. How vulnerable can you be with someone that you want to have that influence with? The opposite of this, and the unfortunate part of this with how impactful trust is that once it is polluted, it does take time to clean up. It does take time to rebuild, but it can be rebuilt. Anyone have an idea of what's the one way that trust, I almost gave it away, that trust is rebuilt? Honesty, okay, that's kind of part of it. Any other? Yes? Consistency, yeah, that's kind of part of it. It goes into this one word. Okay, transparency goes into it. How vulnerability, how do we build back trust? Is through love. Who was about to say that? Yeah, you were about to say it. You should have said it. Okay. And then I wrote in here, I was like, all right, insert the whole message of love is the master key that Pastor did. So then we could just pull in that whole message here and I'd be done. But I thought, as I was reminded of this, and this is just a side note, this is why this is so much fun to do in the church, to talk about this leadership stuff in the church, is because you can actually bring in and give credit to the Lord, to Jesus' ministry. Because when I used to teach this stuff, we would bring it in. You just couldn't necessarily give the source, the Bible, or Jesus the credit, unless I knew I had a group of believers. And anyway, so it's fun to like really say exactly what the truth is here. So if trust is broken, the way you mend it is, which takes time still, but it's love. You all know the verse, the chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, 1 through 7, where Paul talks about he can have and do all these many great things, but none of them matter unless he has love. Which flows so well in this, and you would think that we just made it up to make this message sound better, but this is from the Word, right? This isn't any new age book about leadership, right? We're pulling from the Word of God. So in building trust, I can do all these great things, but without love, None of them really matter. And then, so what is love? If you need a refresher on that, read through chapter 13. Patience, kind, does not envy, strife, all of those easy things to not or do. Oh, okay. All right, so in applying this to your life and thinking about if trust is what's most important and building one-on-one leadership. So one-on-one can be, as I mentioned, it can be you and your spouse, you and your kids, but it's also you and your friends. Moving into the community, we'll talk about teams too. Eventually we'll have to have that trust with team members. But ultimately, as the leader, your influence on that other person is built around trust. So write this down. This is your kind of action. Oh, yeah, as a reminder, you have your pen and paper in front of you. You can build on your notes from last week or last Sunday. But write down the top 3 actions, qualities, probably more actions, that build trust for you in your one-on-one leadership relationships. When you are the receiver of the leadership, what builds trust? So you're not the leader in this, but what builds trust from those that you are influenced by? There's 3 things. And I will accept the awkward pauses because I do want you to think about it and write it down. Okay. That's all the time you get. All right. The next thing you're to do is write down, okay, we are ready for this? Prepared? Engaged? Present? All right. List 2 things that might put trust in your leadership at risk. So in any one-on-one relationships that you have, that you believe you should have influence, want to have influence, are a leader of, just give me 2 things that could put or does put your leadership at risk. You are the leader. Anything that you think might put. So this isn't always the fun part, but it's the important part. Because you are thinking about ways or areas that you might have missed, might have been a blind spot. No one's perfect. You're still loved regardless. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. Okay. So I'll let you keep those. So with number 1, one of the things that I think people tend to miss, what I know people tend to miss on when they think about what builds in their leadership or when someone has influence over them, or that they don't always seek out in a leader, but you should put someone who is honest with you, who's almost like a coach with you. You don't want someone as a leader to always tell you what you want to hear, who isn't able to grow you, help you grow, and that is sometimes pointing out the areas in which you have room to improve. So that could also be something that you wrote down, or if you did not write down, I'll let you write it down to consider it for yourself. Not putting words in your mouth, this is not you. But most people lack the ability to be honest, to confront. So I want you to write down. That's one of the things that might put my trust at leadership is that I avoid having the hard conversations. Okay. And so this is where you can kind of reflect and think about some of the leaders in your life, those that have influenced you the most. They probably were not the ones that were necessarily the, nicest. Well, I guess they should be kind to you, absolutely, but always telling you that you didn't do anything wrong, that you were perfect, that you didn't have anywhere to grow. If you really think about it, they were probably the ones that did tell you that. But there was this level of trust that you had in order for you to receive that information. Will you pull up the next slide for me, please? The last slide. Okay. So when you think about increasing in your techniques or your ability to talk about or discuss some of the hard stuff, the more that you increase your ability to actually confront a situation, a circumstance, a characteristic, whatever it might be, when that goes up, the complexity of situations goes down. So that means that, now, I specifically kept the word confront instead of confrontation because my autocorrect, and when I was typing it in, kept wanting to correct me and say confrontation, because I want to make sure we're all clear here that confront does not have to be confrontational in the sense of it be a big argument, or, most of the time when there's confront, there's emotions, but that's where emotional intelligence, there's books on that too, come into play. Then we go back to love. What is love? It's patient, it's kind, it's all of those things. But the more that you have the increase in confront, so naturally, most people avoid confrontation. They avoid confront. They don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so they'll shy away from it. So then what happens, so that's the opposite of this. So if the arrow went down for confront, you decrease your ability to talk about the hard stuff, then the other arrow actually goes up. The complexity of situations, the complexity of your relationship, where there might be issues, does go up. So these work back and forth. So our goal here on our one-on-one relationships, when we're developing trust, so the reason I'm calling this one out, because this is typically the harder one for us to get to. We know how to develop being trustworthy in our, sharing of personal information. We know how to not cheat, lie, gossip, do all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to assume we all knew that one, so we're going to move into the hard one, which is this one. So when you increase your ability to have those hard conversations, the complexity decreases. So we used to say, and when we do get into kind of organizational leadership training, we talk about frustration leads to breakthrough. So if you find yourself in moments of frustration, you're supposed to recognize that there is breakthrough close by if you use all the tools that you know and work on things like this, which is confront what are you frustrated with, work with your team on strategies. We have all kinds of strategies of like write down the problem, write down what the outcome looks like if you were to break through it. Then if the outcome's worth breaking through it, then write down the strategies to work on it. So there's a lot of tools that can go into this, but the concept is just as powerful as kind of working through those strategies. So increase the confront, decrease the complexity. Now, the counselors in the room would probably be able to give us all kind of tools on, all right, how do I do that so it doesn't turn into and blow up, make a big blow up situation. But we'll let them get into that on a later topic. But still, thinking about how this can be approached or just tested out. These things that are harder, yeah, so think about the opposite. Okay. I'm trying to think about, there is, I think, a really great, which we'll see if Pastor wants to pull it in as kind of part of this training, but My organization right now, even the top CEOs, CFOs, they use something that's called the clearing model. Have you guys, anybody ever heard of the clearing model? So it sounds cheesy as I'm going to talk through it with you, but it's actually really good. So the clearing model is almost like a way to confront. You clear the air, and it goes something like, if I were with Pastor, I'd say, Pastor, can I have a clearing moment with you? And he says yes. And so you say, I've been feeling this way about something. This is the story I'm telling myself, and because of that, this is what's happening or how it feels. And then he is to respond back and say certain things like, I can understand how that would make you feel. Here in return is either confirming that I'm on the right direction or not what he was trying to do. So just so that you know, this isn't always the easiest kind of strategy to apply in this one-on-one leadership. There are many different ways in which you can address this. Blake and I, we're pretty much open books. There's not much, I think, that I hold back or he holds back. And I think that's why it's, I would say we work, now we definitely have Confront, but we work through that. There's a lot less complexities, but it makes you get through things faster. Instead of holding back the ways that you feel, then they start to become real in your mind, but what if it's not real, right? So in that clearing model, it's like, here's the story I'm telling myself. But what if that's not the real story from the other person's mindset? Okay. All right, going to move on from that, but that's good stuff. A whole nother group and a whole nother hour. I always say that. Okay. All right, so great. We've personally developed ourselves. Now we understand the one-on-one development. So we have perspective. We know how to help change or gather additional or new perspective. We realize that once we have that, self-evaluating, and it's a constant. This isn't just a one here to here to here to here, and then I'm done. It's like a circle. So imagine they're all working together, and you're continuing to evolve. But then you have the one-on-one, and this is where you become trustworthy, and you can move into the family development. So family development for the life role, and team development from an organizational role perspective. So in this area, if you are leading or a leader of your family, you typically have more than one person. So there's two people, probably a lot more, that you are influencing or that you are the leader of. So what's happening here is that you're now focusing on empowering the people that you have one-on-one leadership with to work together. So after Jesus spent the one-on-one time, so first he did self-reflecting with himself, then one-on-one development with each of his disciples. Then what did he do? He sent them out together, 2 by 2, but in groups, which he had already had that one-on-one leadership with. What if he didn't have that one-on-one? What if he only had it with one person compared to the other, right? They couldn't be as empowered together. So he sent them off in teams to work on his behalf. The other thing about these teams and leadership is that they also have to trust each other. So there's the one-on-one leadership that they have with each other, where if trust is there, the greater that they can, or the more impact that they can have in their own team. So without personal leadership and the proper perspective, you can't have the best one-on-one leadership where the trust is built, and then the family and team development will lack the ability to empower. So they do all work together to have the most effect. I hear a lot of times, people, motivational speakers, like a lot of us have the desire to want to empower people. I want to motivate people. I want people to and I always say that, and we had the house on 4th Avenue, the outreach house in Columbus. That was one of the things that, I told Blake all the time. I was like, I just want to empower them to go, like, they can do it. I know their situation, they might feel like it's not the best, but I want them to know that, they have the ability, they're worth it, but that, you can have a good speech, you could have a good sermon, you might have a moment of that feeling, but it's really impacted. You have true leadership when you have that one-on-one with them first, and then being able to empower. Okay, so your family will lack the power, or you will lack the power to empower each other if they don't trust you first. Already said that. Okay, so this is where you're the most effective. So if they went out 2 by 2 to spread the message, could they have done it even if they didn't have trust with each other? Probably, but to what extent would they have been as effective? So how do you build, in teams, how do you build one-on-one trust? You do certain things like team building exercises. That's another thing that sounds super cheesy, and I've done many of them, and they are somewhat awkward, but they really do set up those opportunities, the environments, the exercises, whatever the activities may be, for you to gain some trust, getting to know someone else. So whether that's something that's organized by a larger group, or you just take someone one-on-one and you do it yourself. Right? So I encourage from this to step outside your comfort zone. Think of it as team building. But has anyone done team building exercises around here? Yes. Okay, great. Like I said, it is awkward, but there's a lot that comes from it. You realize that you don't take things as personal. You realize that you can confront in a new way, because I'm not going to take it as, I don't know this person, she doesn't know me. No, we know each other on different levels, so the confront can now go up in certain situations, and then now our complexities go down, so you can see how the effectiveness is continuing to, or how that would connect. So in family leadership, in the family leader role, the tough part is that, and most parents know this, or I guess anyone working with a family member, if you are their leader, the toughest part is that your interests and priorities come in conflict with those you are trying to serve. So if you are a leader of your family, you are also serving them. And many times you have to put your own interests and priorities to the side. I would say that that's definitely been mine and Blake's biggest hurdle since we have new kids, 3 and new, but still learning on putting our priorities to the side, or how we want it to flow, or how we want them to grow. So if we weren't to do that, then we couldn't develop them, right? So if I had my own interest or my own priorities first, they would see that, and they would be that same exact way to other people. So this is where you'll see the slow growth and personal character development, which takes time and years, which is not always fun, because I like to see change happen like that. But this is the servant part versus the self-serving. So I would say, even over organizations, the family leadership role is probably the hardest yet most important. So an example of this that I thought back through in my life, when I think about the leaders in my family and how they chose to do this. So my parents, when I was 5, they divorced, and eventually we moved up here, so that's how I got up here. But one thing that they did that was really good is that they got along. They got along, even both like new spouses got along. They all liked each other a lot. Like, they enjoyed hanging around each other. I didn't know that was weird until I met other friends who had divorced families, and they didn't, which it was weird, but it's good, is my point here. But I know that now, as I'm older, that was a choice that they made. They could have decided to not do that. They could have decided to make it awkward everywhere we went, split up, never attend at the same time. But that was such a servant part. I realized that impacted my life and the way that I then saw how others should treat each other. But they chose to put their priorities and interests to the side to do that. Oh, I do think they really liked each other. Well, they were also still we were still family. So I'm actually a double first cousin. Does anyone know what a double first cousin is? Y'all got double first cousins? Okay. Woo! So you're cousins twice. It's not incest. Can I say that word? Okay. So it's not incest. It's brother and sister of one family marries brother and sister of another family. Yes. Okay. So we have the same grandparents. Okay. This is just a side education piece for you guys here. So I guess they did kind of always have to hang around each other. So even though they all divorced, we still had the grandparents. Everyone's still around each other. But luckily they did. They all got along, and they all played very important parts in my life. And another thing is that I don't ever remember my grandparents or my parents gossiping. I don't ever remember talking bad about so-and-so. And I just, it's just something that if they did it, they never did it around me, even at an older age. But those were things that, whether it was just their own morals, their own values, they followed what we shouldn't do. But that had a big impact on my life. So it didn't have to do with how much money they made. If they didn't make any money, what they looked like, what they wore, where they worked. The biggest impacts that I feel like could have gone different directions and does have impact on the leadership and the trust, especially on the one-on-one. You know that you lose trust when you see that happen from people in your family and close to you. Okay, so why is this important? So family leadership, your family influence, teaches people in your family how to treat people of all ages and conditions, how to view success, failure, and adversity, how to solve problems, and how to communicate self-worth and love. So if there's any of these areas to want to grow in or care about the most, it's because of these influences here. So I know that I care probably more than how smart my kids are about how they treat people that they're around. So we had this about 7 last year. I remember we sat down with the teacher, and she was like, okay, we're going to go through their evaluation and how she's doing in school. And we went through the whole thing. And I remember asking, I was like, okay, that's great, but is she nice to everybody? Is she sweet? Is she okay? Does she take care, if someone's crying, does she go up to them? Just to me, that she's going to learn things over her life. But this is where I know that these are the characteristics to focus on. It's also how they view success and failure. I'm going to get into in a second just a couple of ways to think about how you handle certain situations. I need to hurry it up. And I never want my kids to see success in the wrong light. So success is not just, an accolade or a trophy but it's, and not just how proud we are of them. This outcome's more than income. I'm going to read this part just so that it comes from the book and not from me in case anyone gets offended, but this is what it says. It says, the outcome is more than just income. It's growth, development, and nurture throughout their entire life. Circumstances of privilege do not guarantee success as defined by God, nor does being in circumstances of abuse or privilege consign someone to failure. At any point, someone can choose to follow Jesus. And I think that that's powerful for focusing on the leadership development and the strategies you put in place. So the last exercise for you guys, as you think about your current leadership level with your family or teams, is to think about how the people in your family would describe your leadership in these situations. Okay, you ready? How would you say people in your family would describe you in a time of, you want to write this down, crisis? How would they describe you in a time of failure? How would they describe you in a time of victory? How would they describe you in a time of plenty? Plenty, when you have all you could ever need? And how would they describe you in a time of want? So, based on the time here, I'll let you take that for homework. But ultimately, you're to reflect on, do you like what you hear based on what you think your family would say? And if not, why? And how or where do you need to work on it? Okay. So, that wrapped up personal leadership, one-on-one leadership, team and family leadership, and then this allows us to move on to organizational leadership. So what I think is really cool about this part is that, and how it's the last one, is that Jesus himself made this the last one. He could have come on the scene and walked in to the highest establishments and said, I'm here, let's do this. But he didn't. He started with himself. He started in small groups, empowering, sent them out. And then that's where he impacts the organization level at this day and age with the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. So homework from here. Keep developing your two worlds of influence. Keep using them as you go through your day. Cut off the news. Quit having those conversations that pull you from focusing what's important. Identify areas of frustration and how to confront with love. So if we're working on increasing our confront and to decrease the complexity, find those areas that you might be avoiding. You think, I had someone say, well, I'm just trying to keep the peace, which it's not. Even in silence, the frustration can be felt and it grows. So work on identifying what those areas are and how to confront with love and to decrease the complexity. And then where do you need to rebuild trust? Others to you and you to others. So if someone has ever lost your trust, do they know it? Can it be rebuilt? And then, I don't know what number 4 was, so we're going to leave it out. That sentence doesn't make sense. So, okay, so those 3 are good. All right, 2 worlds of influence. Identify your areas of frustration and how you can confront with love. And then where to rebuild trust if needed, whether with you or with others. And we will move into our organizational leadership strategies and wrap it up on Sunday. Amen. 8:01. Does anybody have any questions? I got plenty of time. Blake's at home with the kids. He's just fine. He's loving it. I like this water here. It's kind of like, I don't have the label on. I don't want to offend any of my sponsors. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was a little more insight into if there's frustrations, how to break through, what was that strategy? Do you write out the frustration first and then what? So actually what you're trying to get out of your frustration, what you should try to pull from it, is actually what the problem is, or getting that frustration into an actual sentence or clear, identifiable, like, problem to solve. Because what happens a lot of times is, I mean, you could just say what your frustration is and just let it go and see where it lands, but that's not going to be as probably effective as if you could take your frustrations, that's kind of what maybe you would do on your own, and like put it into a real problem. So what you used to have is, someone would come to us and say, oh, I got this issue, and it was just kind of broad or ambiguous. It wasn't like specific enough. Well, you dig more into it. Well, tell me more about that. What is it really? Well, so-and-so won't do her work. Well, is it the work, or, well, the work, she doesn't. So it's like, you see, it's like you're trying to get deeper into what is the actual problem. Okay. So if you have that problem, you have that frustration, then you skip to, well, if we could solve that or change that, what would be the ideal outcome of solving that problem? Right? So-and-so can't get to work on time. All right, if we solve that problem, then the solution would be, that the doors could be opened and we could start seeing patients, or I'm just giving examples from my past. Okay, that's worth it. That's worth it for so-and-so to get to work on time. Yes, it is. Then it's worth it for us to come up with the strategies. So then what are the strategies? That's an example of how you would do that. It kind of sounds like a long way around it, but what you're trying to identify is the frustration and problem clear? Is it worth finding a solution to? If it is, you work on the strategy. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, like an incentive, reward. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the strategies, depending on what the problem or the frustration was, from a consultant perspective, you a lot of times would have a suggested solution, but a lot of times you want them to come to their own solution because they're also more likely to have the better one sometimes. Uh-huh. Yeah. That's a good point. Yep. Yep. So in most large organizations, they look at people, process, and technology. So is it a people problem? Is it a process problem? Or is it like a need of technology or space and equipment or something to that capacity? Good question, sir. Any others? Well, that was fun. I'm going to have better slides, so I'm going to put together some slides with more of these graphics. Sounds like I need to add that one in there. Yeah, I went back and listened to the first, I made myself, because going back and watching and listening to yourself listen to yourself speak is grueling. Oh, I mean, I'm literally like this, Oh, you're like, why did I make that face? But it's really cool. I've planned to, I've been out of doing that job for 4 years now, and I've planned to put stuff like this together, and I've had it on my to-do list and on my goals. I've done little things here and there, and all it takes is Pastor to sit here a couple weeks ago, look at me and basically say, are you going to do it or not? And I was like, well, now that I have a deadline, and you held me accountable. And I know that the Lord called us to talk about all this. We're going to make it happen. So, cool. I just want to talk with that music. It makes everything you say sound so good. Makes you feel like we're about to go deep. But I'm done. I don't have anything else to say. So exit.
All right, guys. I think we're starting to see what Leadership Institute could be. As that was being released, it touched us all on different levels. You know, you start speaking of your family and then teams. And just if you could imagine, I like when she said, imagine a breakthrough. Could you imagine that type of teaching in everyone that says that they're called to ministry in this house? And just as simple, I mean, I preached for years and years and years, and God had to really deal with me about confront that decreases the complexity, because I was not the person that wanted to go and hurt someone's feelings. Especially when you're planning a church and every warm body that walks through the door, you're like, it took so long for you to get here. The last thing I want to do is tell you that you're not doing, your part. And it just took, I'm lightning fast. I get it quicker than most people. It only took me 20-something years to figure it out that if I didn't tell them, we suffered anyway. And we suffered greatly. And so a lot of times when PMT took a jump, it was actually going to a person saying, look, I love you. Your heart is great. You're doing the best you can, but you're wiping out this whole department. And the leaders around, there's one way to lose the trust for your team is not to be the person to confront the person that they want you to confront for them. And so the team, even the ones that are being productive, will walk away from a team because they came to serve. They didn't come to fight. And if you won't take care of them, they will go find someplace else to serve where there's a healthier environment. But of course, speaking of truth and love, there's a process of Matthew 18. Love is the master key. You try to say, because Jesus saves. You try to save everybody. So there's a way to do it, which is the skill. And it is the gospel. But a church can become toxic without these basic leadership principles, just like your house can. Nobody can tell daddy nothing. Okay. Well, he loses the trust of everybody in the house. So, I'm seeing more while God said, Curtis, stay out of it. Because I would have never came up with that message. That's just not the way that I think, but it is what we needed in this house. So again, she's going to speak on Sunday. Then they have something that they need to do. And then, a few weeks, few months, we'll bring her back another round, and we'll just keep doing this until it becomes help, tool bag. Why be called to ministry and you not know how to do? You can preach the gospel, but your structure's jacked up. Your one-on-one is jacked up. Your self-leadership is jacked up. Okay, then the rest of that, all your team / family / organizational stuff. So when we really begin to look at this, we can start to, some of us who've been in ministry for years, we can say, oh, that's the piece that I made a mistake. Or I went to a church and, oh, that was the piece that made that whole church jacked up. So this is just as important as teaching you how to prophesy. So it may not have felt like, oh, this is like deep spiritual stuff people want to hear. No, this is what keeps your ministry stable. So I'm so glad. I did have an opportunity to speak with another regional leader on yesterday. about Leadership Institute, and they were like, yeah, we can do this, and we can put the school together with this and do a conference with that. And I was like, yes, ma'am, but we got to keep it affordable, because I said the churches of around 100 or so, they need to be able to send their leaders. So this whole thing is gaining traction. The more that she does, and we'll have it on YouTube, and so I just see this expanding within the teachers of this body, teachers in this region, teaching in this house, teaching in other houses. But the main goal about being selfless about PMT is we want to raise the leadership level in this region. So there's going to be big portions of this we'll have to give away and allow other people to have voice and those type of things. But we'll navigate this, but the ball is already rolling, and she struck the match. So let's give Jesus one more hand praise. Glory to God.